I did warn everybody, technology was not my strong point. Okay, what we're going to do is we'll just crack on. There are quite a number of people that are going to join as this goes along, but we're also recording it so we can give everyone access after the event. So I hope that's okay with everyone. So our first presentation, and first of all, thank you so much. And also thank you to everyone for being so supportive in the launch of this new business. It doesn't matter what age you are, but when we launched Board Leadership Lab with the youngest being early 50s and the oldest being 83, it still is hard work and it's still as nervous as if you start a business at the age of 20. So today's session is Navigate the Disconnect when boards fail to engage. And let's crack on. So, setting the stage. Portia Stewart was a Supreme Court judge, and we love this saying. So ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is the right thing to do. At Board Leadership Lab, we'd actually extend that to this. And so it's then about putting the right stuff into practice. And that's what we're trying to do with this new organization. We're a collegiate that's there to get away from ticking boxes and to actually come up with practical solutions. One of our team refers to us as a mixture of pracademics, quite like that. But ultimately, it is about helping corporates to go the right path, but keeping an eye on the end game, which is making the profit or hitting that final goal. So we're going to have a look at a few of the reasons why ethics is required. And I picked 5 quoted companies because if we start with quoted companies, bear in mind in maturity terms, maturity for corporates comes in 5 levels, from the baby through to the full mature multinational quoted company. So we're going to look at 5 quoted companies. Those quoted companies are required by law to ensure that they're following a good ethical and corporate governance process. These 5 didn't. So for those of you who are old enough like me to remember BCCI, this is what happened when it went overboard. It was the biggest Ponzi scheme to date at that time. Now, Charles Ponzi brought out or launched his first Ponzi scheme, as it became known, back in the 1920s. But BCCI managed to end up operating over 62 countries. Its criminal activities included hidden deposits, undeclared trading. It was transferring drug money to different locations. It also had a secondary wing that was being used by various governments to send money to terrorist groups or to overthrow other governments. When the auditors got to the bottom, or as far as they could, on how BCCI had been running, they came to the conclusion that they could not actually ascertain how much money had gone missing, but that it was somewhere in the region of $10 billion. And when you looked at the structure that BCCI had run, literally it looks like spaghetti. The structure has a range of offshore companies. It's got shelves, it's got nominees, it's got holding companies. It's involved most of the offshore territories that are now considered to be completely out of permitted remit, shall we say, for any corporate structures. But the most astonishing thing for me was how it kept its accounting records. John Wells and I have both worked in the past on clients where paper records did exist, and we know how easy it is for those to be manipulated and amended. But here we had a quoted company running multinational, and everything was in paper. Ironically, in this case, quite astounding until you looked closer, the chap who founded this, Abedi, was never prosecuted. He remained in Pakistan. He was protected by the government there. And about 6 months after this collapsed, BCCI collapsed, he launched a new bank, and he continued until he passed away in 1995 from a heart condition. Now, I believe that part of the reason he escaped prosecution was linked to the secondary business, which we haven't touched on here, which was the Black Ops business. So the takeaway from this, along with the Maxwell case, proved to be the two main catalysts that led to the UK and led to North America moving forward with corporate governance frameworks. And not before time. This was not uncommon, and we'll come on to Maxwell as we go through this further. Roll forward 25 years, and we get to Carillion. Now, Carillion is well known in the UK, but it's also well known in Canada and the Middle East. When Carillion hit the skids, it had hundreds of millions of pounds in live contracts, service level agreements. 43,000 employees, half of those are in the UK, and 27,000 pensioners or members of pension schemes in the UK. Thousands of suppliers, and it was the biggest provider to the UK government on public services. So that cut across the list that you've got there, but it also went into defence and other areas. So it would take on the building, and then it would take on the facilities for the building. So I think it was at one point ranked the third largest provider to the UK government. The board here took an aggressive accounting approach to what they did. Now, aggressive accounting is not illegal. One would question its ethics going back to Potter Stewart, because with aggressive accounting, when the company reports, it reports on its forecasted results, not on its actual results. So everyone knows when you build a business, you're going to create budgets and forecasts. You don't expect to actually report your forecast, you expect to report what really happened. Here they reported on forecasts, which meant you had to dive down into the cash flow in order to find out how the business was really doing. And because they were running on aggressive accounting, it enabled them to stay focused on the board's target, which was dividend distribution. And it was paying dividends out of money that it hadn't made. So in the period from 2012 to 2017, it paid out more than 330 million more than it actually had made in cash. And over the 8-year period up to its demise in January 2018, it had paid out more than its declared profits for the previous 8 years. It did this by borrowing, and it also did it by delaying paying suppliers. So it had a major impact on suppliers throughout the chain. When it went into insolvency, the UK government had to step in. So the government funded the official receiver and also continued to run the contracts and pay everyone involved, the suppliers, the employees, because the bulk of these contracts, as we've seen above, were linked to hospitals, schools, and prisons. However, January 18 is when it went into liquidation. Less than 10 months before that, KPMG signed it off as a going concern. Bear in mind, this was a quota company. A few months after that, it issues a profit warning. showing an 845 million loss. And yet by the time of the liquidation, the loss was at 1.3 billion and the pension deficit at 800 million. Take home, we go back to Potter Stewart on this. Here we had a board that was so heavily focused on groupthink and making sure that dividends were paid out, because that's what they told their investors they would do. They would pay dividends. That they adopted a system that was unsustainable. And the government report that was written is very clear on this, that right up until the wire, right up until 3 or 4 weeks before the official receiver came in, they were still talking about paying dividends. It took to that stage for them to make a statement to say that they would stop the dividend policy. Quoted company. So a quick look at 3 smaller organisations here in the sense of the data that I'll touch on. Maxwell and the Maxwell Group, those in the UK will remember Robert Maxwell very well. And Maxwell is the reason why the UK brought in the whole corporate governance framework. It started with the Cadbury report in 1991 and developed from there. Maxwell effectively siphoned money out of his mirror group of companies over many years. And he also took more than 460 million out of the pension scheme. And as I've put a note on here, he was already on the radar. Back in 1971, the Board of Trade had said that he was unfit to act as a director of a public company. And yet here we were 20 years later, and he had taken a public company to the wall. We moved to 2020 and Wells Fargo, US, developed a toxic culture, aggressive selling techniques. Many of its customers suddenly became aware that they also had new bank accounts and additional investments that they hadn't agreed to and hadn't signed up to. This led to the removal of a CEO. It also led to heavy corporate fines. And then more recently, WeWork. Now, WeWork had a toxic culture. It had a CEO who was not being controlled, and the IPO was pulled with substantial losses attached to the organisation. Take home, there is a strong need here for proper governance and clear paths forward. Now, we've looked at 5 quoted companies here where their governance requirements are necessary. Let's take this and roll it into everyday organizations, because frankly, we brought in corporate governance in 1991 and rolled it on. It is no longer fit for purpose, either in the UK, the US, or elsewhere. The reason that we don't believe it's fit for purpose anymore is because it at the time didn't take into account what we're now seeing, and that's rapid growth of organizations. If I take as an example, we have a cybersecurity company on the East Coast of the US, which is due to go for IPO next year, which will have gone from 0 to IPO in 6 years. When the legislation came in place and the codes of practice and the regulations 30 years ago, we never considered how rapid companies would grow. So there needs to be a new address to this. And that's where we start to bring in Board Leadership Lab's approach. And those of you who know us know well enough that we don't take ourselves seriously. And being British, we do like things like rugby teams and football teams. So we created Arctic FC. And we use this as a guide for our early stage and mid-stage corporates. So going back to our maturity levels, Corporates go through 5 stages of maturity, and if you've been following our postings and our newsletters, you'll be aware that we have Horace, the maturity elephant. So Horace goes through these 5 stages of growth. You can apply these at every stage. It does not stop the business or the organization from achieving what it's capable of achieving. It does not cover it in red tape. It grows as Horace grows. But these are basic everyday steps that can help that company to achieve its final goal. And in doing that, not only does it help it to achieve its final goal, it secures its stakeholders. Because ultimately, this is about protecting the investment for everybody involved. So let's do a quick run down this list. So on accountability, again, we're talking about the board here. So we expect the board to be focused on proper conduct, performance reporting, regular communications with all of its stakeholders, not just the shareholders, and to control and set its risk appetite. So clear level of appetite for risk and how that's going to run and develop. And again, that will change as it grows, as it goes into other jurisdictions, as it takes on other acquisitions. With respect, it's reminding the board of directors that they're not there just for the shareholders. They're also there for the other stakeholders. And this is where you start to look more closely at other aspects such as supply chain and bringing in ESG. And it's making sure that that fits with their journey in a proportionate sense. For the confidentiality, we're down to sensitive data, how that's maintained, how many directors should behave, what Chatham House rules really mean. When we move into transparency, the board needs to be very clear and share with their stakeholders the rationale for decisions they make, and also share with stakeholders their terms of reference. You know, if they have a chair, what's the chair there to do? What does the board of directors do? What does the executive team do? How do these fit together? What sits next to where? Share this. Do not hide it behind some mystical cloud. On the integrity front, it really is protecting and pushing forward on mission, vision, values. But more important than that, it's the stated purpose. Every corporate, every organization, whether it's for profit or profit driven, should have a clear stated purpose, and it should have an ethical base around it. And the stated purpose is basically saying, if we weren't here, this wouldn't happen. So it's why is the entity there? What is it going to achieve? And what difference does that make in a positive sense to all of its stakeholders? Moving on to compliance then. So standard stuff you would expect. You're looking at your regulations, your codes, your industry standards, and making those fit with the level of maturity you're at. On fiduciary duties, for a director, it comes down to 4 words: care, loyalty, good faith. If they apply those, then they're on the right track. Yes, they get into an awful lot more detail, and if they're a regulated business, there's an awful lot more behind it, but keeping this nice and simple and enabling younger directors and newer businesses, particularly the rapid growth, to get their head around this, stick with that. Care, loyalty, good faith. And finally, conflict management. Most of the times we work with corporates that have hit issues or are hitting issues. It comes down to a lack of conflict management, and it's toxicity in the board or its group of think. So again, good practices, proper terms of reference, and decent codes. So with this, your take home is Arctic FC It doesn't have a strip, we'll come up with one, but that gives clear guidelines that will protect the stakeholders. And it will enable a business to grow, and it starts to give some sense of framework for directors, particularly those who are doing it for the first time, to understand what's expected of them. Remember, you go out and you drive a car, but you had to learn how to drive the car and you had to pass the test. To be a director, you don't do any of that. All of a sudden, you're a director. Difference is, directors can get locked up and end up with criminal charges. So it's really important that we educate them and get them to a level that enables them to move forward. So I've picked this example just to touch on a couple of particular aspects. So we talked about respect in the boardroom, and this is coming back to Arctic FC, and it's the duties that a director should perform and adhere to, and also how that director works with its stakeholders. It's really important that those terms of reference, aka boundaries, are set and that they are shared and that there is clear transparency every stage along the way. And really, this is where your chair comes in. And we try and encourage corporates to appoint chairs as early as they can in the process. Now, it's not uncommon, particularly in North America, to end up with the chair and the CEO being the same person. Not to be advised if you can avoid it. These are two completely different roles. They focus on different aspects. They have different responsibilities. And ultimately, your chair, part of the chair's responsibility is to manage the CEO. And if you also have a CEO that has then progressed to be chair, it may work, it may not. It depends on the skill set. It's the same as bringing in non-execs. And this, again, comes back to boundaries, setting the terms of reference, and getting all those bits of the jigsaw in the right place so that they fit together properly. So take homes again, clear communication and defined roles will lead to successful board. That way you get rid of most of the human conflict that should arise. You can't get rid of all of it. We are human beings, and as human beings, we're going to argue with each other. That comes with the territory, but at least give a sense of tram lines that each director can clearly see where they need to run and operate between. And this is, now I'm not sure how well you can see this, but we're going to make sure you get a copy of this. This is what a board set of responsibilities looks like and where it should be split. So the essence of any corporate organization is risk, and that is the heartbeat. So the board has to be very clear on its risk appetite, how it's going to run with risk and how it's going to control that. And then wrap around the risk, the culture. And we saw at the very beginning where it's gone wrong and where that culture has not enabled the board to manage risk in the right fashion. If you look at this drawing, then everything above the horizon is firmly in the remit of the board, actively in the remit of the board. So performance, governance, integrity, talent, and strategy. The board needs to take that and own it. Everything below the horizon falls to the executive team. So planning, ops, reporting, compliance, that all falls to the executive team. However, the board has a watching brief. Board can't just wash its hands off this. And it's very common that you will have from the executive team, perhaps the CEO and the CFO also sitting on the board. So you've got that proper crossover running through this. So this is a structure that you would look to have, and you would look to fill in on each of these areas as the business develops. Champions, who's going to take responsibility for which bits, who's going to make sure that they fit together, and who can do that without a conflict. So again, that comes back to how we try and fit this parcel. And ultimately, accountability matters. You can't get away from it. If the board isn't accountable, then why would the investors put the money in? You need to find a way to get this business to move forward and to develop and to grow, and to make sure that all the stakeholders get the return that the board has promised they will do. And again, that will come through the strategic plan. And when we do our next session, we'll show how to build out that 3 to 5 year strategic plan and what elements go into that and how it all sits together. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen if I can work out how to, and then just open up for discussion. So there you go, folks. And I'm delighted to see a few more friends on here. Any questions? At the moment, you're all on mute. Yeah, Joy, go for it.
So I am less familiar with the corporate governance framework and rules and regulations in the UK than here in the States. And I'm wondering how they compare. I mean, I know that the US, in the wake of the scandals, Enron, Tyco, WorldCom, et al., we had a lot of corporate governance reform in the early 2000s. And I'm just wondering where, if there is if there's a great deal of misalignment, and if so, what are the prospects of harmonization? Because obviously boards and board membership is global. In cases.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. If we take it back a stage, then you look at what the duties of a board of directors are, and that final graph, that final diagram that I put up that shows the split. There is a variance between North America and Europe on what directors are there to do and what their roles and responsibilities are. And I don't see that variance changing, and I don't think it needs to change because it recognizes different cultures work in different ways. But underlying all of that, you look at the ethics of how this runs together. And the biggest issue we have at the moment is that what we can clearly see, and that was the reason for picking case studies that were all fully mature quoted companies from both US and Europe. If boards aren't following the rules when they're required to, how do you get boards to follow the rules in the 4 stages of maturity before they get to that stage? So it then moves across to finding methodologies that help corporates to achieve what they have promised their investors they will do. So typically VCs come in, money's in, the VC is focused on getting a given return over a given period of time. How do you align that with your supply chain and your stakeholders because that's a different group of shareholders. Well, they're not shareholders, so your board's got to look after your shareholders first, but also has to look after the stakeholders. And getting those aligned to run forward in a way that gets the best return at the other end for all parties. There isn't a clear-cut answer. At the moment, you have organizations like BlackRock who have changed the way they are valuing corporates because they don't believe that some of the ethical requirements, particularly within ESG, make sense. And actually, according to their studies, ethical corporates are not giving you the same level of return as an investor that you're getting on those corporates that are just focused on the end goal, i.e. making a quick buck. So you look at the investors. If you're a pension scheme, if you're an institutional fund, you're in it for the long haul, in which case you want your investment to last that time and you want it to still be there and still be growing. So you go the ethical route. Therefore, you want your board to apply good corporate governance. If you're an investor who's in for a quick turnaround, so a hedge fund, for example, and you're looking to get that quick hit in, out, gone, are you really that bothered about ethical investment? So there, as I say, there isn't a clear answer on this. Our focus is to try and get corporates to take the ethical approach to governance, recognizing that most of them are not required to follow corporate governance because of their size or their industry sector, and that those who are required to follow it, we've seen too many cases where that's not happening. So rather than it becoming a tick a box, get through the audit approach, look at the longer term goal, and that is look at your strategy. So if you've built out a corporate strategy, and I'm not talking about 3 to 5 years, but you build out a corporate strategy that
Madam, you get 5 minutes more.
10-plus-year path, then you're looking at getting a proper return for all shareholders. Sorry, it's a bit of a long answer.
Thank you. Very thorough answer.
Thank you. Any other questions? Veronica.
The sideways question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I hope that's okay. So at the moment, the focus is on corporates, but we're seeing, or I'm seeing increasingly, a number of organizations and enterprises who are in a way trying to get out of what I call the founder syndrome and introducing councils and boards and trying to introduce a bit more transparency in how they operate. So the Arctic FC is a really clear, structured way of looking at things. And I wondered to what extent you're considering perhaps supporting some of those, perhaps not, they're not going to be sort of the large corporations, but there are going to be a number of organizations that are kicking off and introducing new councils and terms of reference and trying to get boards in. Is there a view in terms of looking at some of those areas as well? I wonder.
Very much so, because going with the same essence as when talking to Joy, this isn't going to be fixed overnight. And frankly, whether or not it's ever fixed is probably never will be. It's trying to hold back the tide. There will always be groups of people who are out to make a fast buck and aren't too concerned about rules. But if you I spent 15 years chairing a defined benefit pension scheme. It was all about long-term investment. And my client was an oil company, so it started with a bad rep, and therefore it was very keen to invest in the right places. with that type of thought process, if you're working with early stage 1, 2, 3 corporates in the 5 stages of maturity, if you get them right now, whether those corporates stay at that level or they keep moving through, you have a whole new group of board directors coming through who get it and who understand their duties and what they can and can't achieve, and who they report to and who they work for. And to me, that's the only way you can move the tide, is to get enough of you behind it that they're doing the right thing and that they're doing it without the need for them to have to do it. And at the moment, you look at the reports that are done by those who are required to do it, and you sit in boardrooms and listen to the debates going on around the C-suite, where we're having to spend X amount of money to fill in this paperwork. This is a cost center. When it's not a cost center, there's clear evidence there to show that if you do it right, you enhance the value of the business for everybody concerned. So yeah, the sooner we can get people into this, in their growth, the better.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. Thank you.
Okay. So folks, yeah, James.
Yeah, Kate, just sort of following that train of thought then. You've been talking about board of directors, you've been talking about companies. And this is something I find quite frightening, but how then should there be a qualification for shareholders?
Should there be a
Qualification for shareholders? And, which is going to be very difficult, but you've got those two ends of the legal and then the ethical.
That becomes a concern, particularly when you start looking more at what's going on in North America and whether that continues here, and if it comes here. And I'm talking about shareholder activism then, because if we look at the impact of there's a positive and a negative issue here. So if you take the negative bit first, and let's get that out of the way. Shareholder activism has become, well, it's been around since the 1940s in the US, but it really took on a whole new life about 2000, 2002. And hedge funds clicked into using the activism route to go in, take out boards, really turn businesses. In the old days, it was referred to as asset stripping. So you had people like Carl Icahn who would go in and do that with corporates to take out the bits he wanted, make a decent return and leave the rest to roll forward. There's nothing in codes of practice or regulations to stop shareholders from being able to do that in either the US or here. You can build elements into shareholder agreements, but even then you're limited because hedge funds can raise enough interest from the other shareholders to achieve that short-term goal. If you then look at the positive end, you move to impact investing. And that's where we're seeing more work from family offices and institutional long-term investors, where they're looking to place the their investments in organizations that have a longer runway and have an ethical impact attached to them. I think one of the biggest issues you've got, though, is there are too many companies trying to grow with incredible ideas and not enough funding out there for them. And whilst that continues, those companies, when they are offered funding are on the back foot. So they're not in a position to set out requirements or to be seen as equal players at the table in terms of negotiating. And at that point, they really do need help to enable them to achieve a better balance and control what the shareholders are up to, and try wherever you can to keep the shareholders off the board. Because once they're on the board, you have a conflict.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming along. This was our first one. I'm sorry we've overrun by 5 minutes. It has been great fun. Really appreciated seeing you all. Thank you so much, and really hope you can come along to the next one. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletters, and if you get a chance, have a look at some of the LinkedIn posts. We will build these out in more detail. We're just getting warmed up. We could go forever as you've already worked out. And we will swap around. It won't all be me. There is a wonderful group of us with a number who are key specialists in their own areas. So you're not going to keep hearing the Scottish accent. And if anybody wants to sort a meeting or anything, I think Farouk is posting the link to our Calendly, which we now have a Calendly. Who knew? Which will be in chat, so please feel free to help yourself. But meantime, wishing you all a fab weekend, and I'm going to go and put a jumper on because I'm perishing cold.
That was absolutely excellent, Kate. You've triggered lots and lots of thoughts and lots of further discussion for sure, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next steps. And can I just say, I absolutely loved your final image, which is the structure in terms of the board governance and the executive team, the responsibilities. That's such a brilliant way to visually express the division of, you know, who's responsible for what and what the board does. So that was absolutely brilliant and inspired for you to include that. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh no, you're very welcome. I have to thank my institute for that because it's their picture. And I literally have it next to my desk.
It's a great question. It's a great thing to see, because it's so often, and I'm sure I'll stop talking because I know everyone's going to get off, but so often that's a question that comes up, and it's really lovely to have it explained in that way. So sorry, thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, take care of yourselves, and thank you so much for being able to come along. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kate.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you, Kate.